present over here, and I guess 6 are. So let's try with our machines, which is our Kali machines and Windows machines over here. So one will be our attacker and one will be our victim machine. So before starting the module, we're going to learn about some basic concepts about malware and threats. So if I ask you a simple layman question, what is called malware? A malware is a short term of malicious software. A virus, you can say. A computer program designed to interfere and damage the computer without the user consent. Most of the PCs in the global are affected with the common type of malware, and they are not aware about this one. Malware is a general term that covers all the different types of threats to your computer safety. Threats means your viruses, your exploits, you can say. It could be a virus, a spyware, a worm, a Trojan, a rootkit, and so on. So each and every threats, each and every virus, or you can say malware, has a different kind of functionality in the different kind of source. For example, over here, the malware term so malware includes computer viruses, worms, Trojan horse, and spyware. This malicious program can perform a variety of functions, including stealing the data, encrypting and deleting the sensitive information. And we know about this kind of attack, which is a ransomware attack. Encrypting, I can say that. Altering and hijacking the core computer function. The modification and hijacking the core modification means to get a shell on the server. And monitoring the user computer activity without their permission. So these are kinds of attacks they can simply perform with the kinds of malwares.
सर वैभव की रिक्वेस्ट आ रही होगी एक बार एक्सेप्ट करना
बिल्कुल अमित So our next candidate has joined, Vaibhav. So over here we can see that we have some types of malwares. The common type of malware we know about. The very first one is our virus. I guess in the childhood we have learned about the virus. The virus is called Vital Information Resource Industries, which has the most common type of malware which can execute itself. It executes itself and spread by infecting the other programs and files. If a system gets compromised with any of the viruses on the network, it can interact with the applications, or it can slow or perform some damages on the core mechanism. That's why virus, a worm, a Trojan horse, a spyware, a ransomware, they are totally designed with a different kind of things. If I talk about a worm can self-replicate. A self-replicate means it can multiply itself, and it's basically used to consume the memory of the hard drives. You can see a worm can replicate itself without a host program and typically spread without any human interaction or directly from the malware author. Same like your Trojan. Most of the applications that we use, we are talking about the crack versions. If we are using a crack version, most of the applications are infected by a common malware which is called a Trojan horse. A Trojan horse is just like a genuine application, but is the most dangerous malware in the entire cybersecurity form. Most of the people, they are not aware that if they are using a crack version of Windows and they are using some activator, so that activator is also a Trojan horse. A Trojan horse is designed to appear a legitimate program in order to gain access to the system. Once activated following installation, the Trojan can execute their malicious function. Trojan have multiple applications to be performed. For example, Trojans can steal the information, encrypt the data, and delete the information, and alter the hijacking core applications. Each and every Trojan has a different kind of functionality that depend on the cyber criminals, why they are made of. If I talk about the spyware is also If I talk about spyware, most of the companies, they simply monitor each and every activities of their employees with the help of spyware or the keyloggers. We are not aware that if we are working in a big MNC firm, we don't know that our PC has a spyware installed or not, because spyware is made to collect information and data of a device user, observe their activity without their knowledge. They simply send each and everything. They simply send each and every activity when the user is doing on the specific host. So we don't in the most of the companies, spyware are used by the parents also, or the multiple applications or the companies. So if you look for the spywares in the google.com, you will see lots of spyware on the market, but don't go for the crack versions. You will see lots of applications of spyware on the entire network. It could be anything. And most of the people, they look for the crack version, which is also a Trojan for them. They don't know if they're using a spyware with the crack version, but they have been monitored, but from somewhere else. So ransomware attack, this was the critical one. Ransomware was designed to infect a user system and encrypt the data. Yes, this was the major attack that was in 2017, which was WannaCry ransomware. WannaCry ransomware. WannaCry, Petya, not Petya are the families of ransomware. What is Eternal Blue attack? Eternal Blue was an attack on your exploit developed by the US National Security Agency's NASA on May 12, 2017. The worldwide ransomware attack used this exploit to attack unpatched computers. Unpatched, that is the most important thing. We are not updating our securities. We are basically focusing on the functionality of the core mechanism of the services. That's why most of the system had been hacked. And if you talk about the ransomware attack, who was the behind? There was lots of people. North Korea was behind in the WannaCry computer, with in fact more than 230,000 computers in more than 150 countries earlier in this year. So the ransomware attack, if you search for the ransomware attack, they have look like something like this. There will be a timer over there. Payment will be raised on this specific time. Your file will be lost in this specific time, and they're gonna give you some instructions and payment gateway. They will ask you some for money, and they encrypt all the data on the specific server. That's why most of the hackers, they basically move to malware analyst, where they simply examine all kind of malwares on the servers. If I see this one, this is a proper example of ransomware attack. So many institutes and many of the pen testers, they prefer some different kind of things. It's designed to infect a user system and encrypt the data. Cyber criminals then demand a ransom payment for the victim in exchange for the decrypting the data, system data. If you don't pay the money, the data will be lost on that. So if you talk about the rootkit is basically most of the hackers, they use rootkit. Why? Because in the rootkit they will get an administrator level privilege, and this is also one kind of your malware. And a rootkit is created to obtain administrator level access to the victim system. Once installed, this program will give that actor root privilege access to the system. All you have to do is to install that specific application in a specific host, and you will get a proper privileged user with the super rights. That's why you can say administrator level access. So if I talk about a backdoor, some malwares are in the hacker layman language, most of the people call backdoors. How simply a hacker can use a rat a remote access Trojan. Secretly creates a backdoor into the unaffected system that allows threat actor to remotely access without altering the user system security program. So it means a rat can bypass the antivirus or any of the firewalls. And most of the people, they buy rats from the dark web or some websites. But the rat or some of the malwares has a specific limited period of time. So in this scenario, we have some adwares also. Adwares, if I'm visiting any of the website, so most of the times what I see is some advertisements on the sites. For example, let's try a website called a normal website. I'm going to use is your temp mail. Okay, so I'm not seeing any. Okay, you can see these are the advertisements. See. And what is the core mechanism how we can see this advertisement? Because they simply follow our cookies parameter, the web cookies. They simply follow our web cache. Whenever you visit any of the website, you will see same thing in the specific other domains because they track with the cookie parameters. And if you see over here, it is used to track the user browser and download history with the intent to display a pop-up or a banner advertisement that alert the user to in making a purchase scene. For example, an advertiser might use cookies to track the web pages or user visit to better getting target advertising. That's why if you are simply visiting any of the website like Amazon or any of the PlayStation website, you will see the advertisement over here also. Last time I was visiting this Adobe Player. That's why I can see some pop-up. But these pop-up are not good. It could be a trap that hacker use this trap for phishing attacks. So over here, advertisement and adware is the most common malware that we use, and some of the adwares, they basically pop up without any human interaction. If we click any of the website, so it will redirect the client request to a different resource, which could be a phishing attack. So if we talk about the keyloggers, most of the keyloggers are used in a different kind of things. Keyloggers, and I guess we are familiar with the keyloggers. Most of the cyber cafe use the keyloggers to trace all the keystroke that is typed in by the client. Also, system monitors are used to see nearly everything a user does on their computer. It includes email, open web pages, programs, and keystrokes. Whatever I'm just typing on the keyboard, it will be make some logs on the backend side. So there could be types of attacks. There would be a huge attack over there. So most of the peoples, these are the common malwares. But if I talk about in the advanced way, there are lots of type of malwares. That's why in the cybersecurity field, there is another life cycle, which is called malware analyst. In this scenario, you should know about the core programming languages and the binary also, plus the reverse engineering attack. So these were all the types of malware, but the most common thing is called a word called shells. In the cybersecurity firm, you will learn two types of shells, a reverse shell and a bind shell, which is the most common thing that you're going to learn. For example, you will see what are shells first of all. Shells are the same thing. Shells can be simply be described as a piece of code or a program which can be used to gain code or command execution on the device, or like server, mobile phones, etc. Just like your malware over here. But the shell over here is a command execution when you simply gain unauthorized access. For example, in the Kali Linux, this specific platform is also called shell, where I can execute my commands in a proper way. If you talk about in the Windows, you have a shell called command print, where we can also execute our batch file. Okay, I said a word called batch script, and over here we run bash script. Bash and Bash are totally different. Bash scripts are basically run on the Kali Linux terminal, and the Bash scripts can be run in the command prompt of the Windows plan. You can see ifconfig is a Bash command. dir cd dot dot forward mkdir, these are the Bash scripts. For example, see over here, what we are was talking about the shell. Shell was around two types, a reverse shell and a bind shell. So one of you guys asked me yesterday how we can attack on a client on a different network. First of all, if you want to attack on a different network, you have to simply send a piece of code to that network. You have to send a malicious piece of code to that specific host on that network, and that type of attack is called reverse shell. A reverse shell is a type of shell in which the target machine communicates back to the attacking machine. The attacking machine has a listener port in which it receives the connection, which is using to code or command execution achieved. For example, if I am an attacker which has an IP address and which has a listener, which has I activated my listener mode to get the communication from the victim. I am on my own network and the victim is on his own network. So in this case, what I'm going to do, I'm going to send a piece of code on that specific domain. I have to share a virus to that specific victim. Through that victim, if the victim execute that payload, on that payload there will be a return address of the victim. When the payload will execute it, it will communicate back with the attacker machine, because on that specific code there was a return address where the communication back to the attacker. Victim connects to the attacking machine on the listening port. So in this scenario, if I have to hack anyone on the WAN network, all I have to send him a piece of code or a malware. If the malware executed from his side, then I will get a proper reverse shell. The execution should be on the victim side. That time we will get a proper shell, which is known as reverse shell, because it communicates back to the attacking machine. Through this one, there is a shell called bind shell also. A bind shell is totally different to a reverse shell. A bind shell where an attacker makes a direct connection with that target. A bind shell is a type of shell in which the target machine opens a communication port. So there would be an open port like 4444 or a listener on the victim machine and waits for incoming connection. The attacker then connect to the victim ports listener, which can lead a code or command execution on the server. So it means that the victim machines already have a vulnerable port which is running on that specific server, and he is not aware about this one. So that's why an attacker find the proper exploit or the vulnerability, and he make a direct connection with the target with the help of the vulnerable port which is running on that specific domain. For example, you will see some of the attackers, they use some popular websites. For example, there are a number of popular shell files. You'll say reverse TCP meterpreter, C99 PHP web shells, JSP web shells, Netcat, etc. One of the things which is common between all these shells are they can communicate over TCP protocol. This is the important part of your reverse and bind shell, where in the bind shell we basically make a direct connection with the target because the port is already running, or the attacker can also open a port on the specific domain with the help of a reverse shell. So is it clear to all?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much. So today I'm going to show you some practical between a bind shell and a reverse shell. For this case, I'm going to use my host called Kali Linux. So over here, we're going to use two things. We're going to use Metasploit also for listening mode. So over here, we're gonna run Metasploit as our listener mode as per the documented data. See, creating Metasploit payload. So through the Metasploit, we're gonna make some payload, some malwares. And over here, I have given some basic commands like MSF Venom, binaries, Linux, how to make Linux command shells, Windows command shell, Mac OS, PHP, ASP, JSP, WAR files, Python files, Bash files, and over here you will see the activity. You will see that one a word called handler. The Metasploit handler is basically used to make a proper incoming shells to receive. Metasploit handler can be a great quickly setting up Metasploit to be in position to receive your incoming shells. Handlers should be in following format. Use exploit multi-handler for activating your multiple connections. Set the payload type, which payload type you have used on the, and I'll host the attacker host, I'll put the listening port and the description. So over here, before we're gonna try to use the Metasploit in the listening mode, and we're gonna try a tool called MSF Venom. MSF Venom is one of the tools which is basically used to make some payloads. So let's do men, which is called manual over here. So in the MSF Venom manual, I can see the description. MSF Venom is a combination of MSF payload and MSF encode. We can create some malwares and we can encode it for bypassing the firewall. Putting both of these tools in a single framework instance, MSF Venom has replaced both MSF payload and encode. So it has been updated. Now it's called MSF Venom. And most of the exploits and most of the vulnerabilities are encoded by the MSF Venom. I think I showed you yesterday exploit DB. Free float. Okay, let's try the Google, I guess. Yes. See, this shellcode, this exploit is also made with the help of MSF Venom. This was the binary code which was talking about. This was the actual code. And in this scenario, they basically use the Python format to stand the buffer. See this one. I'm going to run this command for a demonstration. So I'm just running the code and I'm going to explain this one also.
L host.
Okay, sorry for the L host. So you can see this is the actual buffer memory in the Python format, which is sent by the exploit code to get a reverse shell. But in this scenario, see this one. They simply use the MSF Venom with the utility -p stand for payload type, and they use the payload type for Windows. And they use Windows Metapeta reverse TCP. They use reverse TCP. That's why that in this scenario, they're gonna send the payload to the victim side. I'll host the attacker IP address for the incoming transaction. I'll port for the port to listen, and -p for the bad characters, and -f the format. So in this scenario, we're gonna use MSF Venom. Let me show you one thing. MSF Venom -help. So over here, we're gonna learn about all these things. For example, the number of list of payloads. There are payloads, encoder, nopes, platform, architecture, encrypt, formats. So over here, we're gonna use -p for the payload to select. So if we simply select this one, -list payload, MSF Venom -f list of number of payloads on the server side. So there would be around lots of payloads on the environment. See, there are lots of payloads. So in this scenario, what we're gonna do, we're gonna try to fetch the relevant one. For example, we should know about target. Our target is using a Windows. So it means I have to create a Windows architecture payload. For that case, there are lots of payloads over here. So we're gonna use some filters. So I'm gonna use a pipe command, and I'm gonna use a grep utility, grep to fetch a specific one. So I'm gonna write only Windows. So over here, the payloads that we are seeing on the display, it's all Windows. You will see all the payloads are regarding Windows now. But I have to send this payload to the victim side. So I'm going to use again a grep command, and I'm going to use reverse_TCP. And we're going to use the grep command to fetch the metadata payload. Metadata payload, why? Because we need a master controller to DLL injection. Let's try this one. So over here, I simply added some multiple functions on that screen. And you can see these are the number of payloads from the 1944 payloads. And over here, use the relevant one. For example, I'm going to use this one, Windows metadata reverse TCP. Why I'm just using the reverse TCP? Why I'm not using any architecture? Why we are not putting any of the architecture? Because we don't know, is it a 32 or a 64-bit of architecture? That's why I'm going to use the first one. See, you will see some Windows architecture 64 reverse TCP. Metadata reverse_TCP. Windows metadata reverse TCP RC4. So in this scenario, you have to make a proper relevant one. So I'm going to use this one, the Windows metadata reverse TCP. And we're going to use some format also, the -f list formats. Why we are going to use this one? Because we should know which format is being used in the Windows architecture. So I think in Windows we run exe files, but in the list format you can make lots of types of extensions. For example, bash, c, ps1, PowerShell. You will use ASP, ASPX execution, DLL file, ELF file, which is used in Linux. exe is only used in Windows, so we're gonna use the format exe over here for the architecture Windows. Encoders are basically used to encode the malware to not to be detected by the firewalls. So nowadays, if you are using an encoder, it will be a much price. It will be expensive nowadays, because through the encoder we can simply change the signature of our malware. Signature which contains all the architecture. So over here, the encoders in the MSF Venom is basically used to encode or simply make an encrypted file that cannot be readable by the second party or the third party, and it can bypass the firewall. There was a time when there was an exploit or encoder which is called Shikata-Genai, which was basically used to bypass the polymorphic type malware. Polymorphic is basically used to bypass any of the firewall or any of the antivirus. Basically, it attacks on the core mechanism of the applications. So you can use Shikata-Genai for bypassing, but nowadays Shikata-Genai is detectable, and most of the hackers and most of the attackers, they use their own programming languages to make their malwares. For this scenario, we can use architecture also. We can select the architecture, we can see the output, and there are lots of other things we can use it. For example, let's make a payload over here. So I'm going to make a payload MSF Venom -P. -P stands for payload type, and I'm going to use it for Windows metadata reverse_TCP according to my this. Inject the metadata server DLL via the reflected DLL injection. So we're going to use this one, and over here we're going to put lhost, the local host. The local host is a return address of the attacker machine. So ifconfig, we're going to use 106. So I'm going to put the IP address 106 and the L port, the communication port. So over here we are not going to use any of the reverse port. We're going to use any of the free ports. So I'm going to use a random port 4448. But when you are communicating, when you are using in a WAN network, you have to check which port is open on your local network. So you can use that port for communicating back, or you can say a port forwarding attack. So let's use -f for format exe. I'm going to use -e for encoder. So for encoder, I'm going to use shikata. We are using shikata, and through the -f I am using exe format shikata, and we're going to save this file. What else we need? I didn't use -a for specifying the architecture. Let's use greater than. Why I'm using a greater than sign? Because I'm going to save this entire format in a specific file, which is your exe file. So I'm going to use a path called root desktop, and I'm going to name this one craw.exe. So what the main objective of craw.exe to save all these specific commands or the malware in a specific format, which is your craw.exe format. So if you check the notes which I given over here, you will see the same thing. See this one for Windows. Windows FNP, Windows metadata, reverse TCP, lhost, lport, -e, the format, and greater than shell.exe. But over here, I use some multiple commands. I use the -e also. Check it again. Let's try enter. So the file has been created. Let's see the file. The file is over here. So I'm going to try to open a terminal over here to check the extension. So ls, and I can see the file over here. I'm going to use a type called file, the utility called file, and the file name to check which kind of format is it. So I can see this is a P332 executables GUI Intel with the Windows architecture with a file utility. So when you created a craw.exe file on your server, all you have to do is to send this file to the victim machine. So before sending this file to the victim machine, what I'm going to do, I'm going to activate my Metasploit. Let's open this on a new page. So over here, we're gonna use Metasploit to get a reverse, receive the incoming connection. When the payload will execute. So I'm gonna use exploit /multi/handler, and we're gonna set the payload type. So set payload. So the set payload type should be the same as your MSF Venom you have created. So I'm going to use Windows metadata reverse TCP. So we need to configure the payload because we need to configure the lhost and lport. So show options. So we need to set the lhost, the attacker host, the listener host, and the listener port. We have mentioned 44444, but over here we have mentioned 4448. So over here, set lhost, which is my localhost IP address, attacker IP address, which will be 192.168.0.106. Set lport. The lport would be 44448. because the communication should be on same time. Cross verification, we can see the L host has been set and the L port has been set over there. So let's exploit means execute the command. So now we have a listener activated on our local host 192.168.1.0.6 on the port 4448. Let's communicate with this one with the netstat ANTUP. So on my local server, I can see that there's a Ruby server is running on the port number 4448, which is on listening mode. Because when the payload will execute, we will have a proper shell. But my main objective would be how I'm gonna send this payload. You can send these payloads on email or anything. But remember one thing, this payload could be detectable. That's why most of the attackers, they use cipher or crypter. Crypters are basically used to change the signature of the malware, which will be used for undetectable. Crypter. See, a crypter is a type of software that can encrypt objects and manipulate malware to make it harder to detect by the security programs. It is used by the cyber criminals to create a malware that can bypass security program by presenting itself a harmless program unless it gets installed. The types of crypters can be used. There are lots of crypters. It means you have to encode the malware that could be undetectable. For this case, I have a listener which is activated over here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to share this malware to the local machine, which is my Windows machine. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to make a folder with the name of exploit, and I'm going to share this one on my local network with the help of Python server. I'm going to make my FTP server on my local network. So you can search FTP server Python. There are lots of websites that you can use for making up FTP server with the help of Python. They have given some tutorial points, some introduction, some stacks. You can open any of this one. There are many websites that you can use. These are the basic codes that you can use for making your own FTP server if you know the Python commands. But in the Kali, there's a simple one-line command that you can make FTP server. So I'm gonna make my FTP server only the exploit folder on my local network. So that would be ls craw.exe file. Yes. So I'm gonna use Python -m method simple HTTP server. So I'm gonna make my Python server on the specific exploit folder, and which was already got the port 8000. See this one. Oopsie, sorry. Okay. It's getting in lots of connections. So over here, we have run the Python server on our port 8080, and it will work on the IP address, which is 106. So if I write 192.168.0.106 and the port, which is 8000, I can access the file, which is craw.exe on my local server. So our main objective would be sending this file on the local machine, and for the demonstration, I'm gonna download it from the browser. So you can see the craw.exe is over here. So how the reverse connection works? The reverse connection will work when the victim will execute the payload, and the attacker will has a listener mode. So when the payload will execute, for example, let's execute the payload. On the victim machine, the payload will execute and it will give us a reverse shell, which is a metadata shell over here. So this was a type of reverse shell attack where we simply gain unauthorized access of the system because the victim is not aware about the file. You can bind the file in any of the image file or any of the exe game file. It depends on the attacker how he's going to create the file. So in this scenario, the most important part that you're going to learn is how they can use different kinds of things. Through the reverse shell, you can open a new port on that specific one, and through that open port, you can communicate with it. So over here, I get a proper metadata shell. Again, the question mark, I can run lots of other commands. For example, we're going to learn only shell command to get the shell access. ipconfig. So malware can be run by a local network, but if you want to execute on the WAN network, for that you have to learn about the port forwarding attack, where we have to simply open a WAN port on your local router. In this scenario, you can try lots of other things. So this was a type of reverse shell attack, where you can simply get a root access when a victim execute the payload from his side. For bind shell, the victim machine should already run a vulnerable port. That's why we make a direct connection with the FTP server yesterday. For bind shell, the victim machine should run a vulnerable port or a vulnerable application. For example, again, we're going to run the FTP server. And if I perform nmap, we note that the port number 20 was open, and there was an exploit over there. We can use multiple exploit to get a reverse shell, or we can use public exploit. So through the nmap, we are just checking what are the ports are open on that specific server. So through the reverse shell, we can get the shell and we can do the same commands we have done yesterday. But in the real life scenario, there are many different kind of things. For example, there is a website called Pentest Monkey. I will say note down this one, Pentest Monkey. This is a best website. It will help you later on when you are doing website pen testing. Reverse shell cheat sheet. So this will help you on the later part when you are doing some web application pen testing part. So you will see some bash scripts, some Perl scripts. These are all reverse shells. Python, PHP, Ruby, Netcat, Java. There are lots of shells you can learn about, and there are lots of other things. John the Ripper hash sheet, SSH cheat sheet, informal explanation cheat sheet. There are lots of things you can learn. And there are some commands, some basic commands that you can learn. So the website name is Pen Test Monkey, and there are many other websites also that you can use. But in the real life scenario, the most important part is your cryptors, which is an expensive tool. And most of the hackers, most of the students ask me, sir, how we can make undetectable? First of all, pay some money for that. You will get all the things you need. So in the Nmap, I can see the port number 21 was open, which was a free float, and this port was vulnerable. That's why through the Metasploit, we make a direct connection with the target. We find the exploit, we make a direct connection without a reverse shell. So a reverse shell and a bind shell depends on the attacker side, what option they are made. There are lots of types of attacks. There are lots of types of malwares that you can make. In Windows, there is a malware called bad scripts. Bash scripts. And these scripts are basically run on the Windows machines. You can use it for lots of things. Bash script for files, deleting all files in the current directory with a prompt and warning hidden files. Echo command. See. Through echo command, or they are simply putting a delete function with a dir file. You can read those files over here. See. You have to make this one with a delete all.bat, which is an extension. And if you execute this command on a specific terminal, the folder will be deleted. Lots of attackers, lots of the hackers, they make bad files. Home directories. There's a lots of things you can learn from tutorial points or W3 schools. Malwares are different kinds of things, but what is the expansion you have to show them? It's an important part. Is it clear to all?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Appreciating it.
Thank you so much.